Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, in which three rabbis from Englewood, New Jersey, each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the Parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. This week will feature our once-a-month episode on relationships in the Parsha with my better half, my wife Shoshana, a teacher and school administrator for 20 years, who transitioned her career to become a social worker specializing in couples and individual therapy, all while serving as a dedicated rebbitzin. Next week we'll return to our regularly scheduled programming with your favorite rabbinic banter with Rabbi Akiva Block and Rabbi Daniel Goldberg.
בין קודש לחול אני חי בין האמת שמשתוללת בי עם אלף הרגלים עם כל הפחד שעל כתפיי אני יוצא שוב לפזר את המילים בין המציאות לשיגעון הכל חוזר אליי.
Our one pasuk for this week's Parsha, Parshas Devarim, is Perek Aleph, Pasuk Yud Beis, chapter 1, verse 12. Parshas Devarim, which opens up the book of Devarim, is always read on Shabbos Chazon, the Shabbos preceding Tisha B'Av, the Shabbos during the 9 days. And it's this pasuk that we will be discussing that evokes the atmosphere of the 9 days because it has the word Eicha in it, and we read it in the Eicha truck. Eicha es lebdi, Trachchem, v'Masha'achem, v'Ribbechem. Moshe, in speaking to Bnei Yisrael, reflects on an event that happened years ago that clearly demonstrated that Moshe was having many challenges in leading and caring for this people. From the context of this pasuk, it seems that Moshe is referring to when he followed the advice of his father-in-law Yisro to appoint a system of courts to handle everybody's questions and everyone's disputes. But it's not so clear. And it may be that Moshe Rabbeinu is referring to other events in which Bnei Yisrael were complaining, and Moshe reflected at that moment, oh, how can I bear alone the trouble of you, the burden, and the bickering? This pasuk clearly captures the lament that is suggested by the word Eicha, and it was chosen by Shoshana for us to discuss. And I'm curious to hear why.
This pasuk really captures what I don't think you need to be in a position of leadership to appreciate fully. You can be involved in many areas of Jewish communal life as a layperson, as a volunteer, as a parent, as a neighbor, to understand the complications of what it means to get involved, and certainly for a Moshe Rabbeinu in the position that he was in, to understand tenfold what he was contending with and what his day-to-day life must have looked like. And for me, it's always been intriguing to try to understand on a more sophisticated level what it was that evoked this kind of an expression from him. What nuances, what specifics were going on that really tugged at Moshe to be this explicit and to share with all of us forever just how difficult it was to lead and to hold space for the Jewish people.
I could just think that if a parent were to say this to a kid, and sometimes we as parents, in moments of frustration, we do say things that might be a little bit too sharp. But to say to our kids, I can't take you, I can't bear you, it's a pretty harsh thing to hear. And that seems to be what you're identifying here in this pasuk in terms of Moshe and Bnei Yisrael.
Exactly. And Moshe knew that the same way that conversation between a parent and a kid may have been captured by somebody's phone, Moshe knew that what he was saying was going to be written down for eternity. So he clearly had a message for us that we have a lot to learn from. And I'd like to start with a mashal that the Slonim Rebbe wrote in his sefer, the Netivo Shalom. The Slonim Rebbe offers a parable that depicts a person trying to fix a bunch of cracks in his home. And he does so by painting over them again and again. And for reasons that the person may not even be aware of, it doesn't dawn on him to look beneath the surface and to try to figure out why the cracks that he keeps painting over continue to reappear. And so the end result, as I'm sure you can imagine, is that he finds himself in a perpetual state of fixing cracks. And the application, of course, is that when we find ourselves with behaviors or feelings or thoughts, what I'm going to call cracks, that we don't love about ourselves, we often do the exact same thing. We address them on a surface level without getting to the source of what's causing them.
The quintessential Band-Aid.
Yes, exactly. So let me give you an example of interpersonal relationships. Let's say you find yourself more often than you'd like pointing out negative things about a coworker, and you might just be doing this internally. It's your own thoughts and your own feelings. And you're a good person. So at the end of the day, when you notice what you're doing, you genuinely feel badly. And you tell yourself with real sincerity that you're going to work hard not to feel the way that you do, not to think the thoughts that you have. And that commitment may last a couple of days, it may last a couple of weeks, it may even last permanently. But instead, you find yourself finding someone else's weaknesses to think about. What's happening in an example like this is you haven't yet taken the elevator down internally inside yourself. And what you're doing essentially is putting, exactly as you said, a Band-Aid or tinkering instead of transforming what's fueling the behaviors. And what I'd like to suggest is that this is likely what Moshe had to deal with so much of the time. Putting out fires, essentially treating symptoms instead of addressing what's underneath. And I don't think the Jewish people at that time were in a state of mind in which they were really able to look within themselves and figure out why they were bothered as they were, why they responded as they did. And so Moshe was left, so to speak, playing a game of constant whack-a-mole in helping the people manage and regulate themselves.
Wasn't the 40 years in the desert meant to be a transformative experience? Meaning, can't we argue that was Moshe's job? Or at least that was the people's responsibility to be receptive to Moshe, that they were meant to grow spiritually and get to the core root of the challenges that they faced.
It's an interesting question. I think maybe we could answer it borrowing a term that I actually just learned recently called content stagnation, where we are growing and we are learning, but we're not digging deeply. We're digging just enough to feel genuine and sincere growth, but not enough to get to the root of the issue. And there's obviously a lot to unpack with that term, but I think that might apply here, where the people were growing, just not getting to the root of what was fueling their reactions, their thoughts, their behaviors, their feelings.
I think I changed my mind in terms of the premise of my question, because yes, in some sense, the Bnei Yisrael the years in the desert were meant to be a transformative time, but they were just taken out of slavery. They were given the Torah. They witnessed the most remarkable revelations of God. They're still human beings, and it takes time to process this new reality that they're living in. And so they are human, and like any other humans, it takes time to integrate the very powerful experiences that you've had. And so they also had their journey.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Perhaps I could offer a couple of examples to spell out a little bit more clearly what it would look like not to address things simply at the surface, but to take the internal elevator down and get to the root of what's driving the behaviors. So here's a common example from Jewish practice. Perhaps you find yourself zoning out often or talking more than you'd like during tefillah.
You couldn't find something a little bit more practical that happens all the time?
Haha. So we can always blame the person sitting next to us or the pace of the davening or any other external factor. But the real work would be looking inward and figuring out why those external factors hook me in as they do. Why do they make it so tempting for me to zone out or to talk? And some of the questions I would ask myself are things like, do I struggle with staying focused in general? Perhaps I don't fully see or believe in the efficacy of tefillah, whatever that means. Perhaps I see this as a golden social opportunity, which is more important to me right now in these moments. The overarching question for me has to be looking deep within myself and asking myself really honestly, what's happening for me in this moment? What is driving my behavior aside from the external factors that make it that much easier for those behaviors to take root?
This is such a great example. And I also want to point out something which I imagine you'll agree with, and that is that when you talk about looking deep within ourselves, this doesn't have to be a grueling, soul-searching experience. Obviously, you want to get deep within yourself, but you're not talking about the kind we would do only on Yom Kippur. Meaning, in a soft, gentle way, on any given Shabbos, you can pause and think and try to think a little bit more beneath the surface than just the familiar reasons. And so I want to put that out for people because I don't want them to think that what you're describing is something that has to be arduous, that has to be like root canal. I don't want people to be discouraged or dissuaded from trying something because they don't have to do it in such an intense way and not have it still be deep.
I couldn't agree more. And I held myself back from using the phrase compassionate curiosity because I use it so often. I feel like people are sick of it and would roll their eyes hearing me say it yet again.
I'm definitely not sick of it.
Okay, I'm going to use it again then. We want to approach this type of inner work with compassionate, gentle curiosity. The way we would lower ourselves down to the height of a 2-year-old and talk to them with the most gentle body language, the most gentle voice at their level. That's how we want to talk to our inner selves. That's the model always. And I think even equally important as asking ourselves those questions is even just to notice and pause and to contemplate asking those questions. And if that's as far as we get 1 week, that's still an accomplishment. Perhaps the next time we will ask ourselves some questions, and perhaps the next time we'll ask ourselves a few more questions. It is a slow, gentle process. So I'm glad you highlighted that.
You just gave me a great Hasidic reading of a pasuk, right? Because it says all the way back in Bereshis, Ki yetzer leiv ha'adam ra mine'orav. Our inclination that we're born with as we grow up is inherently inclined towards being selfish and caring for ourselves, and we have to mature into good habits. But as you were talking, I was thinking, you know what? I'm going to read it incorrectly, and I'm going to read it
Hasidically.
I'm going to read it Hasidically. Ki yetzer leiv ha'adam rea mine'urav. That the yetzer, the inclination of a person, is a young friend. It's something within us that should be spoken to like a young friend, a rea mine'urav. And so I think that's what you're describing.
It's a beautiful read.
When I write my Hasidic Sefer, I'm going to include it.
But it captures this idea perfectly. So let's go back for a second to the coworker that you find yourself internally feeling critical towards, right? Even if you don't express it out loud, you feel it inside. What would it look like to take the elevator down in that example? So as I mentioned, you start by noticing, gently gathering information inside of yourself and asking yourself some pretty tough questions. Am I perhaps feeling some element of jealousy? Do I feel maybe some injustice here towards that person? Do I feel insecure? Do I feel inadequate? Perhaps unrecognized? What's driving my feelings? If I'm willing to face these questions honestly, there's a good chance that I'll be able to change far more than the surface level. I'll be able to stop putting on Band-Aids and playing whack-a-mole and keep coming back to the same behaviors with different symptoms. And I think if I could present one more example, I'd like to talk about something that is almost impossible not to contend with today. It's certainly true for me, openly admitted, and that is comparing ourselves to others. It's so much a part of how we operate today that it often happens outside our awareness, and yet comparisons fuel so many of the decisions that we make. Decisions about who we associate with, how to spend our money, how to spend our time, the things we share publicly or we don't share publicly, etc., etc., etc. Here's the key. Beneath the surface for all of us are individual and really personal reasons for why we get sucked into these internal comparisons. And it's only, again, when we're in touch with what's driving and enabling the comparing for me personally, that I'll be able to respond in far more constructive and healthy ways. Working with this example, I think we could see why it's so challenging to take the elevator all the way down. We get in touch with some pretty human parts of ourselves, parts that we may not love about ourselves or that may make us feel somewhat inadequate. Here's my open admission of comparisons. I've talked about this pretty openly. I'm an introvert by nature. And on top of that, I can get sensorily overstimulated pretty easily. So you combine the attributes of being an introvert with being in a situation that's loud or overwhelming. I don't do great in those situations. And there were years, and sometimes even now, with the continuous work that I'm doing on myself, that I would feel myself thinking critically of people who were in parallel jobs and parallel positions who were much more outgoing. And for years, I did not have the awareness, the self-awareness to understand the connection between my discomfort that was being expressed as internal criticism of another. I had no idea that that was A leads to B. It was only once I was willing to take that elevator down that I got in touch with some pretty tough feelings. In certain situations, I felt envious of things that came to others so much easier than they came to me. And that led to sometimes feeling inadequate, on top of which, those are feelings that even now as I'm saying them out loud, don't feel comfortable to talk about, don't feel comfortable to get in touch with within oneself. So I think we have to be honest about, even when we're being gentle and we're being compassionately curious, getting in touch with those parts of ourselves is going to evoke feelings of discomfort. But what getting in touch with those feelings enables us to do is it gives us the choice to confront them, to work through them, and to really get in touch with our core humanity, which actually makes us less vulnerable to the environments that we're in. It also makes us far more empathic to other people.
You said it gives us the choice. I would say it gives us the opportunity.
I think you're right. It gives us the opportunity, which then presents us with a choice. Because I don't think it happens naturally. I don't think it happens organically. I really think it's a choice. The work of self is a choice we make once the opportunity is in front of us.
You know, I was thinking a lot about the language of this pasuk, and I think there's a nuance here that reflects what you were just saying, because here we read this as a lament. Moshe laments, Eicha esa lebdi, how can I bear esa? Now that word esa, how can I bear, is actually a word that appears a number of times in the Torah in much more positive contexts. Esa, to bear, that's the same word that's used, naso. Naso es rosh b'nei Gershon gamhem, right? When Moshe Rabbeinu is investing the Leviim and the Kohanim with their jobs, it's done by raising them up. It's the same word. When a census is taken, kisisa, as rosh b'nei Yisrael, livkudehem, right? The whole idea of taking a census is to ascribe importance and significance to b'nei Yisrael. So in all these other contexts, it's a positive thing. We're talking about raising a person up. Here, the very same word is used by Moshe seemingly in a negative context. Eicha esa lebdi, oh, how can I bear? How can I bear? What do you mean bear? Esa should be the idea of holding up, of raising up all of Bnei Yisrael. And so I would argue that we're reading this pasuk wrong. Yes, we read it to the Eicha trup, and yes, Eicha is a lament. But if you look at the pasuk in its context, it's really not about Moshe lamenting. In fact, the pasuk before has Moshe articulating a bracha. Yosef alechem kachem elef pe'amim, right? V'varechechem, right? In a very previous pasuk, Moshe articulates a bracha that the Jewish people should increase in number. So how would it make sense that the very next pasuk, Eicha esa lebdi, is lamenting having to bear all of you? And so I think what the pasuk is really saying, it's not a lament that Moshe has to bear all their troubles. No, I think what Moshe is expressing is it's hard. It's a challenge. And it takes a lot of work. And I needed a lot of help. But nowhere is he complaining about this task, right? Saying, oh, how can I bear, is not a complaint. It may be an honest expression of the difficulty and the challenge, but it's not a complaint. And so I think that reflects what you were talking about, Shoshana, because what you're suggesting is an exercise of being self-critical, but it doesn't have to be critical. It doesn't have to be about criticizing oneself, right? Being able to ask ourselves deeper questions and look deeper beneath the surface, it's not about breaking ourselves down. It's really just about getting to know ourselves better. And that's not something we complain about. Obviously, it could have a certain element of unpleasantness, but the overarching goal isn't to engage in something unpleasant. Rather, it's to get to know ourselves better so that we can grow and thrive and feel more accomplishment and meaning in what we do.
It's really the only way for us to deepen our self-awareness and for us to grow in every single facet. We have to keep it in balance, like anything else, in balance. Because it's so nuanced and because we're walking between inviting individuals to look deep and grow and at the same time not be self-berating and unhealthfully self-critical, Moshe couldn't do it by himself. He needed help. That is incredibly draining work that fell on one person for the Jewish people.
Beautiful.
בין האמת שמשתוללת בי עם אלף הרגלים עם כל הפחד שעל כתפיי אני יוצא שוב לפזר את המילים בין המציאות לשיגעון הכל חוזר אליי שם במקום ממנו באתי אין שלום והמסע הזה כבד וקצת גדול עליי אני צריך לגדול מזה ודי, לגדול מזה ודי. רק שלא ייכשלו רק לה בין המציאות לשיגעון הכל חוזר אליי גם במקום ממנו באתי אין שלום והמסע הזה כבד וקצת גדול עליי אני צריך לגדול מזה ודי, לגדול מזה ודי. בין קודש לחול אני חי